Hi, my name is Vesna Karapetrova, and we're here today at Canadian Macedonian Place to interview Mr. James Naumovich for the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society. Today is September 19th, 2017. Welcome, Mr. Naumovich, and thank you for sharing your story with us here for the archives of the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society. Let's begin with where and when you were born.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here and share whatever I have. I was born in Toronto in September 1945.
And I know that your name, I know you were a prominent Macedonian lawyer in our community for a long time, and your name has a Serbian ending to it. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got your name Naumovich for your last name?
Yes, actually, in my business, the name has been very helpful because the Macedonians think I'm Macedonian, the Serbians think I'm Serbian, and the Jews think I'm Jewish. But the name is really how it arrived. My father's birth name and his brothers, he has 5 brothers or 4 brothers in the old country, and he got his passport in Serbia. And they looked and saw where my dad came from, which is Ohrid, Resen. And close to Ohrid is the famous Basilica of Sveti Naum. So, just like out of The Godfather, where Don Vito Corleone was named after the village, the Serbian officials looked where my father came from. He said, "Oh, he comes from Sveti Naum, that area. You're Naumovich," because Ovich in Slavic and Russian means from the place of. And so it's from the place of Sveti Naum. And all his other relatives are either Radevski, R-E-D-E-V-S-K-I, but I've got a brother on my father, or cousin, Peter Rostevsky. So, and that would have just evolved out of Radevsky.
Yes, and do you have any other siblings?
I've got a brother who's a retired school teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of your parents, who are your parents, and when did they come to Canada?
Well, my mother was born here on my mother's side from Dedo Trajko and Baba Dosta, and they came from Vesna Ovštima. I don't hear you too. There you go. And it's a Gatska Macedonia, I believe. And of course, on my father's side, it's from Resen, from Lake Ohrid area.
Right. And we have a wonderful picture here. Can you tell us about who the people are in the picture? And
Yes.
a little about where it was taken?
It's very interesting. I'm glad I found it. I had a blow-up made when my mother died. This is Duke's Farm, run by the Duke family, and they used to own Duke's Variety on Danforth. It's now a Starbucks. And Mr. Duke built about 4 white cabins on the farm. And the Macedonian families would go there for a week or two. They'd rent the cabin. It was like 1 window, 1 light bulb, no air conditioning, but it was wonderful. My mother, Sophie, in the middle, my Aunt Dorothy, and on the far left, my Aunt Vasa. Olga, the youngest sister, would not be in the photograph. She had a touch of tuberculosis when she was young, so she spent time but she survived. She spent time in a sanatorium. And Dedo Trajko and Baba Dosta, my grandmother and grandfather. And it's too bad. I had another picture when my grandfather went to New York to pick her up at Ellis Island, and he had a starch collar, and he looked like, who was the actor in Bonnie and Clyde?
Warren Beatty?
Warren Beatty, yeah, he looked a lot like him, and my grandmother was there. It must have been a hot day. She was holding a single wilted rose. So my grandfather came first at a very young age. From what I know, he was about 14 or 12. I don't know who took him in. And then he brought my grandmother over. and he went to New York to get her.
And that's from your mother's side?
On my mother's side. On my father's side,
yes,
they died in the old country, but I understand from my dad, and it's kind of ironic because I used to work for the New York Central Railroad when I was in college. Did my undergrad at University of Detroit. But apparently my grandfather on my dad's side lived in Ohio and worked for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad for like 50 years, sent money home, and then he went home to die. And like the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I ended up working for the New York Central Railroad as well. And I enjoyed it when I was an undergrad.
So your father went back?
No, my grandfather.
Your grandfather went back?
My dad had 5 brothers. Dedo Mircho was his older brother, and they lived off Parliament Street. And he brought my dad over.
Right here we have a very interesting lična karta or passport type picture of your father coming in. Can you tell us about that?
I didn't even know I had it. My housekeeper found it last night, and I didn't even recognize the fellow in the picture. And when I looked at the birth date, I said, holy smokes, that's my dad. And that's the passport that he would have got from Belgrade when he came to Canada.
So his voyage was from, he lived in Macedonia,
He
in
lived
the
in
Ohrid region?
Ohridsko area, and he, at the time it was under Serbian control. He went to Belgrade for the passport.
Yes.
And they gave him the name Naumovich.
That's how he got the name Naumovich. Okay, and do you know the names of your grandparents you can share with us?
On my, of course, Dedo Trajko.
From your
on
mother's
my mother's
side?
side, and Baba Dosta.
Yes.
I don't remember or recall my dad even mentioning his father's name or his mother's name.
Right. Okay, and how about your siblings? Your brother's name?
Bill Naumovich, or William Naumovich.
Okay, and we have a very nice picture of 2 boys on a horsey. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's a pony, and when I was young, and actually that was on Sackville Street, it was in front of my grandmother's house. The whole street from Gerard to Spruce on the east side was all Macedonian, and they would go door to door with a pony, and they would snap your picture and charge you whatever. And so my mom had that done. And coming up is my mother and father's wedding picture.
Yes, we know that your mother was here and born here.
Yeah.
And from your father, we saw the passport that he came to Canada, the Serbian passport. And who brought your father to Canada? How was it that he came to Canada?
I assume it was my uncle Mircho, his brother. My dad had about 5 brothers. They had apple orchards in Ohridsko.
Yes.
They still have them. As a matter of fact, my cousin had a wedding for his daughter, must have been about 8 years ago, and a relative of my father came for the wedding. And they still have the apple orchards overlooking Lake Ohrid. And he said, Jimmy, now apparently the Macedonian troops are close with the Israelis. They do patrols or whatever. And he said, the Israelis now gave us irrigation, with the pipes where the water just comes out drip by drip. And he says, I can turn it on with a cell phone. And to which I responded, you guys have cell phones over there? So it goes to show you. Yeah, so they still run the apple orchards there.
So your brother came as a young boy, you mentioned?
No, my grandfather.
Your grandfather came as
my brother was born here, so was I, so was my mother.
Your father came here?
No, he wasn't that young. He came before the war,
right? But
he was an adult, and he was sponsored by his brother, my uncle Mircho. And apparently they had a restaurant right around Parliament Dundas,
Right.
just a minute lunch. I don't know who came up with the name. And he worked that, and then my dad went into the clothing industry. He designed women's cloth coats before the business went offshore. But that's because with the 5 brothers, they left them home.
You can keep your hands there so
Yeah,
it doesn't...
the 5 brothers left. Ted was the youngest, Metodi. So they left him home with the women, and they taught him how to sew. And so then when he came here, he went to night school and took up designing and designed women's cloth coats.
This is your father?
Yeah, and he would alter my pants, and I'd always ask him, Tate, aren't you going to measure the inseam for the length? He goes, what's the matter, Jimmy? Did you grow out of a 31-inch length? So he was good.
So you were born here?
Yes.
Your brother was born here?
Yes.
And did your father was working as a tailor? Or?
Yes, actually, one of his jobs was with another old Macedonian lawyer, legendary, Mr. Paskalev, the lawyer, years ago. But Mr. Paskalev's father was a tailor. So he worked in his tailor shop.
And where did you live when you were, we saw a nice picture of your parents on their wedding day.
Yeah.
And then when they got married, where did you grow up? Where did you live?
Grew up on Sackville, north of Gerrard, 333 Sackville. It was a semi, and with my grandmother and grandfather. And then my dad, they saved enough money, and we moved to Sackville and Spruce, just a block up the street, 359.
And were there at that time Macedonians?
The whole street, the whole block. The west side was all Englishani. The east side, it was Macedonian. Pandovica lived on the corner, and my mom and dad, and further down the street, the Rallies, Dr. Larry Rally is his mother and father. The Kachopolises, the Phillipses, who started Krasno Selo. It was the whole street was Macedonian.
And they all lived on the same street?
One block.
One block. And what language did you speak when you were growing up? You mentioned about going to school in kindergarten.
Yeah. We only spoke Macedonian, and as I think I said earlier, I didn't learn to speak English till about grade 2. And they actually... I might have told you this on film or before. When I was going to Lord Dufferin, didn't speak a word of English. The school board sent an inspector home to determine why little Jimmy couldn't speak English. Because the record showed I was born here. So I didn't pick it up till around grade 2.
You grew up with your parents or
yes,
your grandparents?
Together in the same house. Yeah.
Right. So your parents spoke to you in Macedonian as you were growing up?
Yeah, and my mother, or grandmother, for her life here, learned to speak very little English because my grandfather did all the shopping. She had no need to leave the house. She cooked and did the laundry and did the housework and messied, There 3 or 4 of the ladies would get together to make zelnik and bake. And that's a funny story because the table, there'd be a crew of them, about 3 or 4, and they're rolling the dough by hand and slapping it. So the table actually became, it was worn out, became concave. And I thought, Jesus, what a junky table this is. And years later, I went to Stratford, Ontario to see a couple of plays. I went to an antique market, and here was the identical pine table, worn down from the baking, selling for a fortune. This is back 25 years ago, selling for $2,500, a beat-up pine table. Yeah.
It was the same one or no?
No, it was the same style.
But same style. And as you were growing up, what schools did you go to?
Schools?
Yes.
Lord Dufferin Public, and then Jarvis Collegiate. And then from there, University of Detroit for undergrad.
At that time, was it common for Macedonians to go to university, or were you one of the few?
I'd say I was one of the few, basically because there weren't many to begin with. See, there weren't that many Macedonians, but you aspired, much like the new Canadians now, to education. My father never told me, go to school, become a lawyer, and get wealthy. He simply said, pursue knowledge, that knowledge in and of itself was the highest good you could pursue. And that sunk in. He wasn't a capitalist or a wealthy guy, but he told me to pursue it. He was very helpful. One year before Christmas exams, I was going to drop out. The students were there, upper middle class. They were ripping pages out of the case books so you couldn't read them. And I graduated with a liberal arts degree, and I phoned my dad. I said, Tata, this is completely different than what I experienced in Detroit. This is cutthroat. And I worked very hard, but I said, I'm thinking of dropping out. He said, Jimmy, understand, if you drop out, there's 50 men standing behind you ready to take that chair, and you'll go through the rest of your life not knowing whether or not you were good enough. But all you have to do is do your best, and if you don't succeed, then at least you know you weren't cut out for it. And instantly, all the fear of failure left me. I thought, well, geez, this is easy. All I have to do is my best. And I did very well. So
he was very...
That's how he trained me.
He encouraged you right from...
Well, he just said, give it your best shot. Don't just stand up and leave the chair.
So you went to
Windsor Law School.
Windsor Law School after Detroit.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting why you went to Detroit to do your undergrad.
Yeah, that's good. We were all subject to, no, you didn't have Canadian content. It was Life with Father, Ozzie and Harriet. They were all American shows. So I wanted to go to an American university. And Detroit was handy. It's a Jesuit school, like with Notre Dame and Boston College. But the Jesuit fathers gave me a scholarship, cut the tuition. I worked for a year and saved up money, and then after that there was good jobs in Detroit, high paying. Vietnam was, they were looking for labor. They couldn't hire people fast enough because of the war. So I had high paying jobs.
While you were going to school?
Yeah, worked for Ford Motor Company. They actually hired me on contract before I started law school. Vietnam was winding down. And before that, I worked for the New York Central Railroad, big tri-levels of cars, railroad cars moving out. The conductor would carry a pistol right on the engine because you drove through some of the tough areas of Detroit and they'd shoot at you. And there was the engineer that rode the train, drove it, and 3 signalmen, the conductor, because the train could be a mile long, so the conductor was at the front, I'd be in the middle, and there was another signalman on the back end, right at the end, but not by the caboose. They call it a way car at the end to pass it. I enjoyed that. They train you because it's easy. You're jumping on a train going 10 miles, 12 miles an hour. You make a false step, you can get your legs cut off. So we trained, and but I had a good time. And again, it's similar to like my father's father, who worked for the B&O, the Baltimore and Ohio, for 50 years before he went home to pass away. And then after that was the Ford Motor Company.
This was, you were working while you were going to school?
No, this was the summer. I never quit going to school.
Right.
I had a 4-year course. I'd work in the summer, and my mom and dad, they'd send me whatever it was, $50 or $100 a month for pocket money. First year I had a part-time job in the cafeteria as well at University of Detroit. And as I said, the Jesuit fathers gave me a break on the tuition.
And then you continued your law degree in
Well, I went to
Canada.
Windsor. Now, the U of D is a Catholic school, Jesuit actually. And back in those days, Windsor Law School was also Catholic. Before it was Assumption, and then it became Windsor, but it had a Catholic background. So it was just across the bridge. So I kept up all my friendships with my college friends from Detroit.
Yes. About your friends when you were going to school in Detroit, were there Macedonian friends that you had?
Let me think. No. They were mixed. There was a Canadian, but he wasn't Macedonian. And kids from New York stayed in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And I still communicate with some of them. Mm-hmm. Pat Need from New York, now he's a commodities dealer, broker in San Diego. He had a villa in St. John's in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And he just sent me pictures. He got flattened by Irma. Yes. Lost everything in terms of the villa.
Yeah, just. But
I still get emails from him.
Wow, and then you completed your degree in
Windsor.
Law, and then how did you continue your career from there?
Well, I articled. I had good marks. I was accepted at London School of Economics for a master's, and right at the end. And I got the letter of acceptance from Dr. Ann Bohm, the director at LSE, London School of Economics, asking for £50 and to arrive on such and such a date in September for they called it the Michaelmas term, the Michaelmas Christmas term. But I decided I had enough, so I went out and got an articling job. And then, because you're going to ask...
Where did you article?
Atman Goldenberg. It was a good firm. It was a litigation firm with about 12 lawyers, and they did a lot of litigation. Mm-hmm. But I ended up starting to do that and ended up doing real estate. Mm-hmm. But when I graduated, my kumbadi, John Evans, had a graduation party. Vicky Evans, who's the youngest daughter of Lambro Tanekev, one of the godfathers in the Macedonian community, and I should tell you, historically speaking, that John Evans' mother, Vicky, was the youngest daughter of Lambro Tanekev, and there was Baba Vana and Baba Sveta, Steve Stavros' mother. There was about 5 daughters, and it's amazing. Each daughter turned whoever they married into a millionaire. And it was that guy knows. It's Baba Sveta had Steve, and they all did well. Then there was another one started Columbia Coffee. So from the Tanakevsky clan, they were very, very
entrepreneurial
and strong character.
Strong.
So you can be entrepreneurial, but you need character to build wealth. And so John Evans, Senior. Or Ted Evans, his dad was godfather to my father. And in fact, I think Vicky, his mother, was maid of honor, and Ted was the kumbadi. So when I married Vana, John, Ted's son, was my kumbadi. And it wasn't until a birthday party. John's passed away now from a blood clot since around January 2013. And but what his sisters didn't know, I said it goes back further, because your grandfather, Lambro Tanekev, was godfather to Dedo Traiko. So the families go back like 100 years. Lambro Tanekev, godfather to TR, Dedo Traiko. Ted Evans, godfather to my father, Ted. And John Evans was godfather to me. Mm-hmm.
So a long line of...
100 years.
Yes, yeah. It's wonderful that you continue that here.
Yeah, and remember, in those days, there was no OHIP and no welfare to speak of. The godfather was responsible to raise the family in the event of a financial crisis. It was a heavy responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I got along great with John. We golfed together, went on golf trips together. He was a great guy.
So then your career here developed, and you were quite involved in the Macedonian community as a practicing lawyer,
Well, I used to, my dad was from St. Clements, and so I would go every Sunday, and in the Zala,
Yes.
in the basement. You'd have coffee before church or after church, and my dad would introduce me to clients, and Monday the phone would start ringing. So, but when I graduated, Vicki Evans, John's mother, because we graduated in the same year, had a graduation party. So I had to go. And I knew there would be a lot of eligible Macedonian girls there, and I warned my mother and father, especially my mother, understand, if you introduce me to one Macedonian girl, I'm going to walk out, jump in the car, and leave. And at the party, Sana Chris, I guess it's Vanna's aunt, I was talking to, Fred Flores' son married her. And Fred Flores' son is graduated, he was a Rhodes Scholar and a heart surgeon, to, she was a Greek girl. I forget the name, but we were talking about tennis. I was a member of the Beaches Tennis Club, and all of a sudden somebody pulled me like this from the back, and I went dragged backwards. And Sana Chris introduced me. This is Vanna Bitov. Oh, she was looking okay. And we got to talking, and one thing led to another, and we started dating. And that's the wedding picture. Mm-hmm. And actually, Vanna, it was a big deal. It was December. It was a big hunt to get those calla lilies. Mm-hmm. And you'll see I'm wearing a ruffled shirt. And before the wedding, I hadn't tried it on. And it was a British-made shirt, and it's a size smaller. So to my horror, when I got up in the morning, it didn't fit. And my buddy Dave Bezak had driven up in a blizzard he lived in Baltimore at the time, for the wedding. So we drove down to the Riverdale Park, where the artificial rink is, south of Danforth on Broadview. And I skated nonstop for 2 hours, went home, and was able to get into the shirt. And we showed up late for the wedding. Vanna might have thought I'd left her at the altar, but it was a matter of fitting into that shirt.
Can you tell us some of the people in the picture here?
Yes, John, my godfather. Mm-hmm. Hold on, I don't want to move it. That's Vicki Evans, his mother, my brother, Vanna, myself, my mother, my father, John's sister, and Ted Evans, they were best friends, mm-hmm. John Evans' father. And
then tell us how your life continued when you got married as a young lawyer in a...
Yeah, we bought a townhouse at Quail Valley. Vanna was a good cook.
And what was the date when you got married?
It's a prophetic date, December 21st, the first day of winter, the shortest day and the longest night. Sometimes I wonder if that wasn't appropriate, but it was, while it lasted, it was a good marriage. Mm-hmm. And you have children? 4 kids, and she just emailed me. We still communicate. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I had a birthday party for Gabriel on Sunday night, and Vanna attended. Mm-hmm. And so we had 4 kids.
And you got married the year in
1975, I beg your pardon. No problem. And Johnny was born 1980, and they don't ask me. They came every 18 months.
But the names of the children?
Johnny's the oldest, and then Sasha. He was baptized James Alexander, but he goes by Sasha. And then Jenna Nicole Naumovich, and then Gabriel Julian Naumovich. And they were all going to be JN, John Naumovich, Jenna Naumovich. But then with Gabriel, he was going to be Gabriel Julian, but Baba Dotsa, Vanna's mother, preferred Gabriel to Julian. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they were all baptized at St. George's.
Yes, that was going to be my next question. What church did you go and?
Yeah, it was basically St. George's. My grandfather on my mother's side, his name's on the plaque as one of the founders, and they were all baptized at St. George's. That was Vana's church too. Although I remember when my Mary Manoff got married to George Manoff, it was at Svetikito in Metodi, up the street. And but I was on the board of directors at St. Clement's, so go figure. You know,
yes. Tell us about your involvement. You were very busy as a practicing lawyer and had a growing family. It must have been a very busy time.
Well, I look back on it, I don't know where I got the energy. I certainly don't have it now.
But tell us what you were involved in the community. You were quite involved. What organizations and churches?
The board of directors of St. Clement's.
What year about?
Oh, jeez.
Just
it was
estimate.
Around 1980,
1980, okay.
And then.
And how did you become involved in St. Clement's?
Well, it was really the church of my dad. It was more to the Yugoslavian side, and my dad came
because he had come from the Republic of Macedonia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your dad was involved in the church?
No, he was actually a non-religious person. But a saint of a man. And he came, understand, he came out of Europe in the 1930s. And if you remember Europe in the 1930s, you were either a Nazi or a communist. There was nothing in the middle. So he came out of that milieu. And, but a saint of a man. I mourned him heavy for 3 years. So we fast forward. I served on the board of directors at St. Clement's. And then the generals, as I call them, John Bidoff, I have to give him kudos. That's my ex-father-in-law, Doca Bitov, Vasa Evans, and geez, he owns Fantasy Farms now. I drew a blank. Chris, who was it?
Van Petrov.
Van Petrov, of course. And then, so they were on the board, and they were the leaders, along with Virginia. She was a loyal soldier right from day one, taking notes, as I recall. She was the secretary. And they came up with the idea then to start the CMP.
Canadian Macedonian Place,
yes,
which is where we are right now.
We raised donations, had fundraisers.
So you
courted the East York politicians and the federal, I think it was a minister of health, it was a Tom Mills, and to get government help and permits. And so I served on the board of Canadian Macedonian Place, but not as a general, as a foot soldier. And then they got the idea, form a youth association to carry forward. So I was given some names and phone numbers, and we had.
So you were on the board of directors here on the Canadian Macedonian Place.
That's right.
Right, not at St. Clement, the church.
I was at St. Clement's.
Yes.
And after that, I came here.
And you were on the board of directors? Yeah. Okay, for a few years at St. Clement.
Yes, and a few years here, and then, but I was always coming to the meetings for, geez, it must have been 5 or 6 years. And somebody suggested start a youth association. So I was, okay, we'll have a Canadian Macedonian Youth Association, and we had the inaugural meeting at my office at night there. That was at
Where was your office?
Broadview Danforth at the time. Okay. Where the Macedonian Village restaurant is.
Yes.
It was on the second floor. Paul Stergiu owned it. He's from Agatska, Macedonia. And we had the meetings. I came up with the name or somebody, Canadian Macedonian Youth Association. I wrote the Constitution.
So you were the president?
No, Don Argiro was. I just wrote the Constitution, but I ramrodded it to a large degree. Mm-hmm. Donnie Argiro was the first president of the CMP.
And that would have been what year?
This is, I'm looking at the crib sheet, and it says, I couldn't find your name on the board until 89, 90. You were re-elected 90, 91, 92, 92, 93. But it's a CMP youth. It's actually CMYA, Canadian Macedonian Youth Association. And it was good. We would have parties. Stop me if I'm boring you.
No. What kind of fundraising events did you have?
We had disco. Disco was huge then. And Flori Yankov, Dr. Yankov's daughter, and I would go to the Loblaws on Broadview, and we'd pick up out of the pay about $250 worth of feta cheese and crackers and olives, because you know we got a special permit bar, so you got to have food. We'd hire a couple of part-time police to keep order, and a disco guy to run the disco. And I forget her name, I don't know if Virginia does. We would get flyers, and St. Clement's, to their honor, donated the hall.
So you would have your functions at the hall?
Packed. It was packed. And the one gal was a tremendous artist, and she would do the posters, 8 by 11 letter size. And I'd run about 500 of them off at the office and hand them out to the kids, and they'd go around to the high schools and the churches and to their Macedonian friends and hand them out. You show up on a Saturday night, there was 800 people there. They were making, I forget what they were making just on the bar in those days, $2,000–3,000 on liquor sales. But a lot, and I found out later.
Stacy Kirchhoff is the name of
Yes,
yes?
Stacy Kirchhoff. Thank you, Stacy. You were terrific. And thank you, Virginia.
Yeah.
He was a marvelous artist and worked selflessly. So did a lot of the kids. They got involved. Donnie Argiro got involved. Van Petrov's son was terrific. He was the treasurer, as I recall. I think he's an accountant now. So, and then from those dances was an important cash infusion for CMP at the time. But I found out later that from those dances, many Macedonian boys and girls met each other and got married. It almost brings a tear to my eye now to think of it. And then it evolved, because from the Canadian Macedonian Youth Association, Donnie Argiro got started the Canadian Macedonian Hockey League. And that grew, the Canadian Macedonian Hockey League grew out of Canadian Macedonian Youth Association.
Yes, and give us the dates for the Youth Association again. When you...
I'm looking at the crib notes, it looks here, 1980, 81.
So 80, 81 right. Is when it started, and it continued for a few years?
But I moved out of my old office around the spring of 80 to where I'm practicing now. And the meetings were held at my old office place at 95 Danforth Avenue. So those initial meetings took place prior to 1980, but that's when it was forming. And then we would meet here. I don't remember having a meeting at my current office, which I've been there for 38 years. But we would have the odd meeting here once it got built. As a matter of fact, it was built because we were having the discos and donating the money. So I'd attend at the board meeting, and they'd want to know how much we made and how successful. But it didn't boil down to just money. You made use of the infrastructure. So you had the place to meet, you had the people, you had the phone numbers, and just one thing grew into another. From the CMP board to Canadian Macedonian Youth Association to the Canadian Macedonian Hockey League, which was very big as well. And
was it Tom Dimoff who was also heading the hockey league? Or what, did he come
there was a Dimoff that owned my office building at 95 Danforth together with Paul Sturgeon. But I know that name. He probably was.
Like you said, it evolved. Then
yeah, it evolved. No, I know the name Tom Dillon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And then how did your involvement continue?
Well, we carried on. There was the groundbreaking ceremony. CMP was built. And then Stan Thomas got involved. And he hadn't been involved before, but then he became another general, another captain, and he was president for many years, did a wonderful job.
And you continued to be on the board of
I had marital problems. It was after 17 and a half, 18 years, Vana and I got divorced. And it was a long, dragged-out affair, not very pleasant. But we're friends now. How can you not be friends? I got 4 kids with her, and she blessed me. They're all good-looking, healthy, and successful, for which I thank her. And as a matter of fact, for Gabriel's birthday, we celebrated. He was born September 15th. We had a lovely dinner, and Vana attended on Sunday night, just this past Sunday. And she just emailed me twice before I walked into this interview with a question about a referral for somebody that does partnership agreements. So we still communicate. I can't say we're Gussie Gashti, but we communicate.
Great. And your involvement in the in Macedonian community has been ongoing, and I know there's one doctor here that you mentioned that you wanted to.
And I'm looking, if you can see the date, 1949.
Yes.
But Dr. Malin, he was probably the first Macedonian doctor. He used to do house calls, and I remember him coming to my grandfather's house on Sackville, lecturing me about something, don't eat too much candy or something, and they'd give you, in those days, the cure-all was penicillin, but he actually looked after me, and a complete legend in the community. And then after that, of course, Dr. Tommy Jeleff, and he would do house calls. I remember he'd come, the cure-all, whatever you had, they gave you a shot of penicillin, and my dad would walk, as I don't know, Dr. Malling was just a legend, a saint, and so was Dr. Jeleff. And I remember my dad, walking him to there was no old hip, he'd give him $5 cash, he'd give me a shot of penicillin, and paid him $5 at the door. He did house calls.
And you remember them?
I remember them totally, yeah.
Okay. And so these would be like first doctors in the community, in the Macedonian?
Yes. And I believe Dr. Jeleff's son went into medicine. I think he went to Dublin. And actually Chris Stavros' son also is a doctor. He went to, I think, Ireland to study medicine. And
there was a Dr. Yankov?
Yes. Flori Yankov's father. He was a doctor that practiced in Virginia, can correct me, on Queen Street. There were a lot of Macedonians on Queen. There were Daylight Studios. The photography shop that took half these pictures was Daylight Studios. And the producer of the Macedonian show, Bill Yankov, was his son. Really? Yes. If you watch Dr. Yankov's son? Yes, if you watch the Macedonian show. And Flori, it's been years since we shopped at Loblaws for those dances, and good for him, carried on. And Dr. Yankov was a popular doctor too. You're bringing bring back some memories for me. Yes, and then talking about Macedonians in the community, we've got some very interesting pictures here of Macedonian protests right in front of Queen's Park. Can you tell us about them? Well, I'm looking at Gabe now. He would have been he's the young one. That's Johnny, the oldest boy. So that had to be about 30 years ago. And there was a protest at Queen's Park, and it was well attended. And John Bitov, there on the left, gave a speech. This was at the same protest. And really, they were the powerhouses, Dots and John Bitov and Van Petrov and Vasa Evans. They did the organizational skill. And I'm sure Virginia. So that was a successful. Right. And you've been involved in the Macedonian community throughout the years. What has motivated you to do that and get involved? Well, first of all, my wife's family was very involved in the Macedonian, so that was that pushed me, because my father was not what you would call the most devout church-going guy. My grandfather was. He took me every Sunday by the hand to St. George's. We did Sunday school in the basement. And understand, my mother was born here, but she could read and write Kirillitsa. She went to school to learn it. My dad,
do you know where she learned it?
You know what? Probably, it wouldn't surprise me, St. George's, if they didn't teach it there, but she knew it. And I was jealous because you'd get the Macedonian Tribune, and it was all in Kirillitsa, and I couldn't read it. My grandfather and my mother and my father read it. And so Vana's family pushed me into it because certain people have a large degree of energy and are motivated for the community good. And I include Virginia, people like Stacy Kircha, again I'll say it, John Bidoff, Van Petrov, Dotsa Bitov, Vasa Evans, and Stan Thomas, yes. Tireless worker for years. This is just as I was moving up. So.
Chris Pellier?
Yes. More so Stan Thomas than Chris Pellier, but Chris Pellier found, through CMP, you're talking about Stan Thomas, Chris Pellier, they found their Macedonian roots and attached to it. That's the way to put it. Yeah. And there was others, besides John Evans, who we were in association for, Boris Christoph, who was Macedonian, and but it was really through CMP and the involvement with my wife's family, ex-wife's family, that got me more involved than I probably otherwise would have been.
Right. And in terms of your the way your business developed, did it have? Can you tell us a little bit about how was it difficult at the beginning, or was the Macedonian community important part as well?
I can comment on that. It was never difficult. We exploded right out of the gate, and the reason is it was previously it was Nick Mirchev and myself, Naumovich and Mirchev. It was humorous because we never traveled in the same car, because if there was an accident, the whole firm would be wiped out. So
you were with a partner?
Yeah, Nick, and then first 5 years, and I'd go to St. Clements and attend service and hand out business cards down in the Zala where you have coffee. We'd walk the Danforth. In those days, there was a plethora of real estate shops. And I just walk in, hi, I'm Jim Naumovich, here's a card. Nick and I are practicing there up the street at 95 Danforth. Why don't you give us a try? We have good fees and we work hard and we'll do a good job. And you'd be amazed at how many relationships started with agents that went on for 20 years as a result of just walking in and saying, hello, here I am, here's a card. And so it took off from the beginning, and we did a good job, and it was, I used to do criminal, then it evolved into real estate, wills, powers of attorney, estates, and less litigation. The first 5 years I was doing more divorce work and criminal, and I left it. Divorce work in those days, the petition for divorce, it was 5 pages. Now, just the statement, net family property, can run a whole binder now, and in those days it was half a page. So the spouse filled out their net worth. You had half a page, right around paragraph 7 or 8 of the petition for divorce, and I didn't mind doing it. You had to get gowned. Had a murder trial, lots of assaults, drunk driving, and it was suggested I get out of it. And actually, my ex-father-in-law said, no, you got to get into the more white-collar type of work, the commercial work. And I was getting tired of guys with tattoos from their wrist up to their shoulder phoning me at 2 in the morning to do a bail review. So And it was tough to get out of because they keep following you. They kept calling, but then I just started referring them away, and it evolved into a commercial family practice suited to the Macedonian community. And I've got guys now, kids that are 30 and 40 years old, I did their house deal for their parents, and now they're coming. And because I don't promote anymore, I sold the practice actually to another lawyer, but I'm going to keep my license and going. It's not a fixed sale price; it's a percentage of gross billings over a number of years. So and I sold my office building, but I got a lease back, and it turns out my own client bought the office building. My son Gabe was showing it. He knocked on my door. He said, "Dad, I just want to go through here." And the client was sitting across the table, and
while your business was thriving, I remember that you were supporting the Macedonian program. You were advertising regularly.
Yes, and there was a book. Remember, and I'd rent the inside front cover. There was a book, and I advertised, but I always bought an ad in the Macedonian, either half a page or a page.
And on the Macedonian show with Danny Stoychevsky.
Another blast from the past, like you're bringing up names. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
For a long time.
So, yeah. And you see, a lot of the Macedonians didn't speak the language, and I started. As I said, when I started school, I couldn't speak English. By the time I became a lawyer, I spoke very good English, but my Macedonian was like an ovchat. I could string a few words together, but from the contact, like it or not, sakish, ne sakish, you're going to pick it up. You spend an hour signing up a family, the odd average deal. I spend an hour with them because Borovish Ponashi, and you'd have to be a Durval not to pick up the language. And more I became more proficient at it, and they appreciate that. It's important to be able to communicate. And they gave me good support, but I was good to them too. But there were good support. It was basically wills, powers of attorney, and house deals, or refinances too.
Mm-hmm. And you're really an example of a successful Macedonian here in Canada who was able to have a very thriving law practice.
Yes.
And in terms of giving advice to our Macedonian youth, Macedonian upcoming generation, what would you like to share with them?
Well, when I was coming up, you hear now, and the Law Society talks about work-play balance. I've got a tenant, English upstairs, he's a lawyer. He brings his dog to the office, and his secretary, when he has to do his business, takes him out for. To me, this was unheard of. He's a nice guy, and then he takes a lot of time off. You have to mix work with pleasure, but be prepared to do self-sacrifice. The first generation carried the load of their forefathers on their shoulders. You sacrificed all for the sake of, who knows, the kids, the future generations, for the sake of the respect of your mother and father. So I would say work hard, take notes, you're going to school, don't skip class, get the linear and the spatial. Linear is reading, you're going to read the material. Spatial is you're going to class and you're going to listen. So I did so I would tell them, go to class, take notes. Don't be afraid to sacrifice the body a bit. Mm-hmm. It's necessary for the greater good, but don't sell it all down the river.
Yes. Now you had a partnership with John Evans
Association.
Can you talk a little bit about that and when he died?
Sorry. It lasted about 3 years, and we got into. I drew up an association agreement, and we practiced under the banner John Paul Evans and Associates. And I still get the odd letter with his name on it. And he would come over for dinner. He liked red wine, so I always kept a good store of red wine. There's a funny story. We were golfing once at Lionhead, and it was a threesome. Myself, John, and Alfred Shore. And Alfred's a former president of the York Region Lawyers Association. Well, Lionhead wanted, he said, well, there's a threesome. We're going to put this old guy with you. And John raised, he says, what is, I booked a threesome. And the starter corrected him and said, excuse me, sir, we have the right to force another golfer on you because we got a lineup. You got to play in a foursome. You can take them or turn in your equipment, we'll give you a refund. I said, it's okay, I'll golf with him. And one of these old guys, striped shirt, plaid pants, nothing matched. Golf clubs that were like 50 years old, the old metal aluminum, but he could hit the ball. So I asked him, by the way, what did you do in your other life before you retired? He said, well, I was a buyer for the LCBO. I said, oh, really? I said, no, I'm not much into it, but what's a good bang for the buck on a red wine? And right away he said, the best bang for a buck on a red wine is an Argentinian Malbec. So I always used to get Cabernet Sauvignon for John. The next time he came to dinner, I gave him the Malbec. Katina was a good one. I recommended it. And he loved it. And then after that, every time we had dinner, John ordered a Malbec. and he was a red meat eater. Apparently it's good with red wine. But I miss John. And we talk about him all the time because he was part of our foursome. We'd go in April to South Carolina, barefoot resort, 5-day trip. And he was a Stopengia. So while we did our last minute shopping, John would clean the apartment, the unit, to have it ready. And of course he loved to cook. And he'd give recipes to my housekeeper. She'd write them down. We still use them. And his parents wrote a cookbook. Vicki Evans there from Ted's Restaurant. And she did wonderful baked goods. And we just talked about him. I golfed last Saturday. And Mike Clark mentioned how he missed John Evans and what a bon vivant he was. Yeah. He was a sport.
There's been a lot of changes. There have been a lot of changes in the community, and you've seen them over the years.
Yes.
What would you like to say to our young people?
Well, I can't talk now, but I would say support your churches, support Canadian Macedonian Place. And they never did get a nursing home built, did they? So wouldn't it be nice to see another wave come in of young people with energy to revitalize the churches? St. George's, I believe, is closing, or it's closed already. But then again, you got, every time a church splits, it's good, you end up with another church. St. George's split, then you ended up with Sveti Trojica. Right, and Sveti Ilia in Mississauga. I did the purchase. St. Ilia, right, in Mississauga.
In Mississauga.
Yeah, in Mississauga. It was a tough search years ago. And so I would tell them, support your local organizations. I see the newcomers coming now. I have a Filipino. She's been with me 12 years. Housekeeper secretary, smart. Her cousin was actually assistant dean of the nursing school at University of Detroit. She told me that last night when I was getting to go to the pictures, and I said, no, it's actually Mercy College. And she said, yes, you're right, Mercy College. So she's smart, but she goes to church every Sunday. I have a bunch of clothes because I'm making room for files. We filled up about 6 garbage bags of clothes. And it took them to St. Lourdes on Sherburne and Wellesley. So, and then just this past weekend, she calls it a gathering where they have, the way we did, picnics at Bronte Park, sail-ski picnics, village association. They have that, and she's intimately involved in all of these activities through the church. And I don't think, whether it's Filipino or Muslim, through the mosque, the first generation bonds through their religious organizations, and from that you get the associations, the churches, the nursing homes, the old age homes built, and you know, what can I say? Keep it up. I'm too old now to do it. I'm happy to.
На нашин македонски сакаш нешто да кажеш на крајот?
На крајот съм много благодарен што ти ме покана за дојдам туа, and I hope народото I was able to naучи them nešto about the historia, and especially here, Dr. Malin, you can have that picture, you can have my dad's passport, you can have, although really the mother, you know, at Duke's Farm, I think I'd like that one back, but I was very pleased to come.
Oh, you're donating those items to the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society. That's wonderful.
The passport of my father.
Yes.
The picture of Dr. Malin. I didn't know I had either till Elena brought them up last night, and I went. But I used to have so much more. Like and really, I have to keep the 8x10 of my mother and her sisters at Duke's Farm for when I may need it sometime in the future. But no, I enjoyed this. I talked myself hoarse, but I hope you got something out of it. And
we did, and we appreciate you sharing your story with us, because it gave us a lot of insight into the history of the Macedonian community, and we're really happy that you were able to take the time to share this with us at the Canadian Macedonian Historical Society.
I'm happy I came, and I'll just look at my. Well, we had a good hour and 45 minutes, so that was good, and I was pleased to come. I enjoyed talking, and it brought it back when you mentioned Stacy Kirchhoff that did the artwork. It just brings you back, and mentioning Stan Thomas and Chris Pellier, they're blasts from the past. Although, you know, I've done work for Stan.
It was our pleasure. Our pleasure to have you.
Yeah, he's from Windsor, you know, Stan originally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vesna.
Thank you, and all the best.
Den.
Na zdravje da ti biti.
Na zdravje.